everybody, it's Mrs. Peachy again with Summer School Biology. Today we're going to talk a little bit about cell division, otherwise known as mitosis. So I'm sure you have all heard about mitosis before. It's something that you've talked about in middle school. However, hopefully by the end of this part of biology, you'll have a little bit of a better understanding about what this is. Now, oftentimes people think mitosis and cell division, and I mean that's pretty much true, but when we look at mitosis or we look at any other part of cell division, we have to look at the entire cell cycle. And I'll spend a bit more time on the cell cycle later on in a different class. But the cell cycle is made up of a bunch of different phases. We get G1, S, G2, mitosis, also known as the M phase, which is followed by the C phase, which is sometimes listed as part of mitosis. It's called cytokinesis. But the bottom line is that cells do die, and when they are dying, they need to replace themselves so that, you don't just constantly lose cells and wither away to nothing. And animals, plants, other organisms need to grow. And so that growth means you need new cells to do that. So both to replace, damaged or dying cells, and because of growth, you need a way to duplicate the cells that you have. So cell duplication means that you need a copy made. And it's not as simple as just scanning it, or taking a picture or something like that. You need to make more of everything that's in that cell, including the DNA and all of the cell organelles that are inside. And so that's what's occurring during the cell cycle. And for the most part, most cells kind of don't do a ton of active dividing. They have like a certain time frame that they go through this whole process, anywhere from weeks to months to hours, I guess, depending on the type of cell you're looking at. But when we look at the cell cycle, you can see here that just a small portion of that is spent on mitosis. The rest of it is other things. And a lot of times people gloss over the other things and we don't talk about them too much, but they are pretty important. For example, during the S phase, this is when the DNA is duplicated. This is when an extra copy of that DNA is made so that the new cell gets a full set of DNA. And if you remember, DNA is basically the directions to make your body, to build everything in you, to perform all the functions that keep you alive. So obviously that's pretty important. So the other thing that happens is the cell needs to grow and get bigger. It needs to get bigger because if you just take a cell and divide it in two, you're going to have two cells, but they're going to be smaller, right? And if we continued this process and kept dividing our cells in two, we would end up with really, really small cells. If you have if you have a big cell and then you grow it twice as big and then divide it in two, then you'll have two cells that were the same size as the original. So that takes place in this part of the cell cycle, in the G1 and G2 phase. You also need to get the organelles that need to duplicate during these processes as well. That's going to take place after the S phase. And then you need to get basically that new DNA that's duplicated needs to be checked for errors to make sure there's no mutations that will cause cancer. And so that error checking and stuff is done during the G2 phase of the cell cycle. So it's all really important stuff. So if you get back to, what's inside your cell, here's your cells, an animal cell, right? And in the nucleus of the cell is long molecule called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid. And it is very twisty and stringy-like, And when you normally look at a cell through a microscope, you can't really even see it because it's just too thin and twisty. If you look at it up close, it's actually pretty complicated. It's made up of all these different atoms. So one of the first things that has to happen is that that these twisty DNA strands have to clump together. So they're long, skinny strings almost, and they start winding up so that they form thicker strands called chromosomes. And so during this first part of mitosis, we can actually visualize these individual chromosomes. And we can see that every person has 26 pairs, just like this, right? 26 pairs, just like this top sheet. One copy comes from mom and one copy comes from dad. So these are not exactly the same as each other, but they are similar. And the example that I gave is that, it's like if you have two cats standing side by side, they both are going to have pointy ears, whiskers, little noses, fur, tails, but they're all both cats. They have all the characteristics of cats, but one cat might be gray and the other one might be orange tabby. One cat might have yellow eyes, one cat might have blue eyes. So they have different characteristics. Same thing with your chromosomes. They are the same in that they all have the same features, but they are not exactly the same. They are homologous is the term we use. So during that S phase, the chromosomes are going to double. So you've got now two sets. So basically 2 from mom of each one, 2 from dad of each one, right? Because what's going to happen, of course, during mitosis is that one set's going to go to the new cell and one set's going to stay with the old cell. So mitosis is going to start with, let's start with what's between mitosis first. Remember that cell cycle, you've got that M phase, that G1 phase, the S phase, and the G2. So this is where DNA is just making copies of itself, and you've got all the other stuff that's going on. That's called interphase collectively, all 3 of those. That just means it's not during mitosis. Interphase, we've talked about some of the things that can happen. DNA can replicate. We also have these organelles are being copied, things like that. But when you look at a cell that's in interphase, all of the DNA is enclosed in the nucleus, and you can't really make it out. It's very blurry. It just looks like a big blob. Now, when it starts to go into mitosis, the first thing it does, like I just said, was it winds up and gets clumpy. So you can see the chromosomes. So that's really the biggest characteristics. The other thing that happens is these centrioles form on the ends of the cell. And then they have these little spindle fibers that come from them, like this. And those spindle fibers are going to attach to the chromosomes, and they're going to move the chromosomes around in the cell. Okay? And this is what a cell looks like in prophase. The nuclear envelope also is dissolving at this time. So now the chromosomes are going to be free floating in the cytoplasm. And I had another picture. You really can't see it well on this one, so let's see. You can see it in the metaphase picture. So the metaphase picture, those spindle fibers attach to the chromosomes and just pull them to the middle of the cell. And here you can see those long, kind of thin lines. Those are spindle fibers. And then this little, blob here and this little blob here are the centrioles. Okay, so that's basically just where the spindle fibers are attached at the very ends of the cell. And you know it's metaphase because they're all lined up in the middle of the cell at this time. Anaphase, basically those spindle fibers just continue to pull on the chromosomes, pulling half to one side of the cell, half to the other. Remember, each one is made up of a full set of 23 pairs, so 46 on each side. And you can see them pulling apart here. And in the last phase of mitosis, telophase, the spindle fibers break apart. They're like split by an enzyme. A new nuclear envelope forms around each set of chromosomes. So you've got separate nuclei now. And you get one last phase, which is, there we go. So you can see the chromosomes in here. You can see they're encased in a nuclear envelope. You can see a cleft forming in the middle of the cell. But debatably, the last phase is cytokinesis. Now a new cell membrane forms around both cells. And you've got the old cell and an exact copy of the old cell. Okay? Ta-da! Magic. You've grown. So that is, in a nutshell, mitosis. And we will talk more about the cell cycle coming up here. But also, you'll hear about something in the next few weeks. Well, in the pace of this class, you'll be hearing it in the next few days, called meiosis. And meiosis sounds a lot like mitosis, and it's similar in some ways, but it deals exclusively with the generation of egg and sperm, and that is it. It has nothing to do with actually making the baby in a way. The baby's not growing. It's just making those sex cells. That's meiosis. Mitosis is every other thing. Growing, replacing damaged or dying cells. All of that, any type of growth, but even if it's cancer, it's mitosis. Okay? Hopefully that made sense. Give me a holler if you have questions, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye.